gentleman. And I yield to the senator from Massachusetts for a question without losing my right to the floor.
And I thank the senator from Connecticut, and I thank him for his leadership on this issue. It's the issue that we should be debating this week, next week in the United States Senate. I thank him and Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, Senator Durbin, Senator Booker, Senator Cardin, everyone whose voice is down here saying the same thing. We've learned a lot about this problem, but we still don't know all of the answers. But the answers that we do know, we should be voting on this week. We should be putting those protections on the books. And so there is a common sense knowledge that we each know that the FBI should have the authority to block gun sales to potential terrorists. How hard is that? No gun sales to potential terrorists in the United States. The NRA says no. The NRA said no last year. The NRA said no the year before. The NRA controls the agenda of the United States Senate. They control this body. They're the ones who decide whether or not guns can be sold to terrorists in the United States of America. The NRA. Now, the American people say NRA should stand for not relevant anymore in American politics. But it's not so. The NRA controls whether or not we're going to be able to vote on banning terrorists from being able to purchase guns. So a terrorist can be on a no-fly list, can't get on a plane, don't want a terrorist in the passenger cabin of a plane in the United States, so they're banned from getting on that plane. But they can just walk across the street into a gun shop and buy an assault weapon that they can then use to kill people in the United States who they hate. Does that really make any sense? Of course not. Why don't we have the vote? Because the NRA does not want a vote here on the floor of the United States Senate. They don't want a debate on this issue. And so we're going to continue to stand up and fight for this vote, for this issue, to be considered here on the floor for as long as it takes. Because if the FBI believes there's a reasonable chance that someone is going to use a gun in a terrorist attack on our people, it should have the ability to block the sale of a gun to that person. That's only common sense. That's what the police chiefs want. It's what the FBI wants. Why are we being denied a vote here on the floor of the Senate on that issue? So this goes all the way back to the incredible power of the NRA historically. From 2004 until 2014, people on the terrorist watch list legally purchased guns, listen to this, more than 2,000 times because the FBI had no authority to block those sales. Can you believe that? Over a 10-year period, 2,000 times, the FBI could not stop a terrorist, a potential terrorist, from buying a gun in the United States because the National Rifle Association does not want potential terrorists to be denied purchasing guns in the United States. Now, what kind of crazy position is that for the NRA to take? That potential terrorists should be allowed to buy guns in the United States. Well, back in 1994, we were having a debate over the ban of assault weapons in our country, but it came to my attention that China was actually selling 1 million semi-automatic assault weapons per year for $80 a piece inside of the United States. 1 million guns a year. and we were negotiating a treaty with China at the same time. So I organized about 130 members of the House on a letter to President Clinton saying, no support for any deal with China until China agrees that they will not be selling assault weapons for $80 a year in our country. That was 22 years ago. 1 million assault weapons a year being sold by China. That would be 22 million additional assault weapons in our country coming in from China. That's banned. However, the domestic ban here expired a couple of years ago. Now here we have another case of a terrorist saying that he was inspired by ISIS, inspired by this so-called caliphate outside of our borders to buy a weapon to kill Americans. Like China, are we just going to allow the NRA to say, no, it's all part of free commerce? No, we don't have any rights to limit the sale of these weapons? Or are we going to say there has to be commerce with a conscience, that not everything can be sold to anyone in our country, that some people and some things are too dangerous to be allowed to be purchased within our country? So I support very strongly the bill which Senator Feinstein has introduced to give the Attorney General the discretion to prevent someone from buying a firearm or explosives or obtaining firearms dealer license if the Attorney General determines that the individual is a known or suspected terrorist and has a reasonable belief that the individual may use the weapon in connection with terrorism. Can it happen again? You know that it can happen again. This terrorist is citing the two terrorists in Boston, the Tsarnaev brothers, as an inspiration to him. There's an online brainwashing, recruitment, which is going on all across our country. So that idea is out there. The question is, how easy are we going to make it for them to be able to gain access to the instrumentality of their devastating acts against our society? Are we just going to allow them to walk into any gun store once they've been so radicalized that they're about to act on these dangerous activities? Well, Senate Republicans oppose that common sense legislation. Senate Republicans aren't allowing us to have a vote or a debate on this issue out on the Senate floor. One day after the tragic terrorist attack in San Bernardino last December, Senate Republicans voted against Senator Feinstein's legislation to close the terrorist gap in terms of their ability to be able to buy these assault weapons. 6 months later, Omar Mateen, a terrorist investigated by the FBI, targeted the LGBTQ community and murdered 49 innocent people at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. Yet the Republicans continue to willingly follow the NRA and oppose this bill from becoming law in our country. The NRA has repeatedly opposed and worked to block that legislation, and apparently they think it's okay for someone like Omar Mateen to be able to buy an assault weapon with impunity in our country. Mark Twain once remarked that common sense is very uncommon. He was surely talking about the Senate Republican caucus when it comes to having a terrorist be prohibited from buying an assault weapon in the United States of America. This mass shooting in Orlando has exposed the Senate Republicans and their common suffering of a common sense deficit disorder. Today, I call on them to stop their opposition. I call on them to have the courage to stand up for what's right, for the American people, for the people of Orlando, because I truly believe that a vote on that bill, if you hold hands with the NRA, the Americans will hold you accountable. I hope our Republican colleagues understand that and fear that, because Americans are tired of living in fear. that their community will be the next Orlando. And I ask another question. Wouldn't it be easier to develop effective solutions to gun violence in America if our nation's top researchers could actually do research on gun violence? We are facing an epidemic of gun violence. More than 33,000 people are dying in our country each year from gun violence. It is a public health emergency, and we must treat it that way. So shouldn't we ask ourselves, why is it happening? And what can we do to stop it? When disease and illness bring widespread death, doctors, scientists, and public health researchers study the causes so that they can find solutions. And the federal government invests in those efforts. For diabetes, which kills almost 76,000 people in the United States each year, the Centers for Disease Control receives $170 million. For planning and preparedness against the flu, which leads to 57,000 deaths each year, the CDC's budget is more than $187 million. For asthma, 3,600 people, CDC receives $29 million. For gun violence, which kills more than 33,000 Americans a year, the CDC's budget is $0. Yes, $0. And that's because beginning more than 20 years ago, an appropriations rider has prevented the Centers for Disease Control from advocating or promoting gun control. Many interpreted this provision as a ban, and it has chilled any research into the causes of gun violence and how to prevent it. But in 2013, President Obama directed the CDC to conduct critical public health research. And the principal congressional author of the rider, former Republican Congressman Jay Dickey of Arkansas, has now disavowed it, recognizing it was a mistake and calling for federal gun violence prevention research to move forward. And just yesterday, the American Medical Association, the nation's largest association of physicians, voted for the first time in support of ending the so-called ban on CDC gun violence research. As AMA President Stephen Stack said yesterday, with about 30,000 people dying each year at the barrel of a gun, an epidemiological analysis of gun violence is, in fact, necessary. And so that's the question which I ask out here of Senator Murphy. That's the question which I ask of Senator Durbin. That's the question which I ask the Senate President. Why can't we find a way to at least fund the research on the causes of gun violence? Why can't we find a way of just putting $10 million a year in that research? Why can't we do that? I asked Senator Murphy the question, but he knows the answer. The answer is that the NRA does not want a single nickel to be spent on that issue. And the NRA controls the agenda on the Senate floor with a vise-like grip. And it will not let it go. But we have reached a defining moment. The American people have seen in this one incident how tightly the NRA controls the agenda of the Republican Party in our country. We should already have voted on this ban. We should already have moved on to other gun control issues. But no. Whether it be the terror watch list or it even be research at the CDC on gun violence, no action. So we can study how to prevent children from operating pill bottles, from suffering from head injuries on bicycles, on how to use a cigarette lighter so they don't hurt themselves, but shouldn't we study how to stop kids from firing guns that can hurt them? So let's give the medical, scientific, and public health community the resources which they need. Let's ensure that if someone's going to buy a gun, that they have to get a background check completed before they're allowed to do it. Let's make sure that we put in place all of the protections which are going to be needed to protect ordinary Americans from this action. And so I say to Senator Murphy, I say to Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, what you suffered in Newtown in Connecticut is sadly just a preview of coming attractions, unless we change the laws in our country, unless we put the preventative measures on the books so we can avoid the worst, most catastrophic consequences of this out-of-control gun epidemic in our country. And so what you're doing here today, along with Senator Booker, is forcing America to understand the cause of their problems and understanding why we cannot put a ban on a terrorist from buying a gun in the United States. All issues go through three phases: political education, political activation, political implementation. What the senators are doing here today is forcing this political education, forcing people to understand that this is not bipartisan. This is not, the whole institution doesn't work. This is a deliberate decision made by the Republicans to only abide by what it is that the NRA, an outside party, wants to permit being debated here on the Senate floor. But at 33,000 deaths a year, with terrorist activity after terrorist activity now occurring on our own shores, in Boston alone, we've had Mohammed Atta and 9 others who hijacked 2 planes. We've had the Tsarnaev brothers who detonated explosives on Patriots' Day at the Boston Marathon. It's time for us to just stop here. It's time for us to start to do the right thing so we can make it harder for these acts to take place. And so I don't think we should stop this discussion until that happens. And that's why I thank you, Senator Murphy, for taking this time. Senator Booker, Senator Blumenthal, everyone who has participated. And I'm going to be with you every step of the way until we get the votes which the American people expect from their elected senators. And I thank you for yielding for a question.
Thank you very much.